Hello, thank you for joining us today. This is the second in a series of 3 recruitment webinars this year for the CCST Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. Today is on what's it like to be a CCST Fellow. My name is Sarah Brady. I'm the Deputy Director of CCST and also a Science Fellow alum. I know our audience is joining us from all over the place, but I'd like to start out by acknowledging that I am presenting to you in Sacramento from the tribal land of the Nisenan people. Sacramento is a gathering place for many local tribes. We acknowledge the Southern Maidu people to the north, the Valley and Plains Miwok peoples to the south of the American River, and we would also like to honor the Patwin Winton peoples to the west of the Sacramento River. Today, I'll briefly introduce CCST, provide an overview of the fellowship, and then open up the floor to hear from the amazing panelists we have today. So to start, the California Council on Science and Technology is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization established 35 years ago at the request of the legislature. CCST was created to provide science and technology advice from the wealth of outstanding academic and research institutions in our state directly to policymakers. California is lucky to have such an incredible network of expertise, and our job at CCST is to help amplify and translate the expertise in this network into actionable advice for policymakers. We do this through a number of mechanisms, including expert briefings, workshops, we write peer-reviewed reports, and of course, we run the CCST Science and Technology Fellowship Program, which is why you are all here today. We recruit and train and place PhD scientists and engineers for a year of government service and leadership training in the executive branch and the legislature. The current class of fellows just began our 14th year. We've trained over 150 PhD scientists and engineers in policy. And we're very excited because our applications for our 15th cohort just opened on December 1st. Remember, you do not need to have your PhD in hand to apply this year. We just require that you have a plan to finish your PhD by September of next year in order to be done before you begin the fellowship. Interviews are in May and the fellowship begins on November 1st. Though for the past 2 years, we've been able to have a handful of fellows start sooner than November in the CCST office, working on CCST expert briefings, workshops, and other policy work before the boot camp training begins in November. So please do apply, even if the November start date is not ideal for you. Our next webinar, the third in the series, will be on January 12th and will be especially helpful to you if you have questions about the application process. We'll publish a link soon on our website to the webinar, Navigating the CCST Fellowship Application and Interview Process. Please join us then if you plan on applying for our next cohort. For today, we'll focus on what's it like to be a CCST Science Fellow. How do you spend your time? What do you learn? And a million other questions about the day-to-day life of the CCST Science Fellows. I have with me 4 alumni who will share their fellowship experiences with you and what it's like on a typical day to be a fellow in the CCST program. We will have lots of time for audience questions, so please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions for the panel, and we'll prioritize questions that hit on what it's like on a typical day during the CCST fellowship. Panelists, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I'd love to have each of you introduce yourself, share why you chose the CCST Fellowship, and share how the experience compared to your expectations. Rylie, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. Hello, my name is Rylie Ellison. I did my PhD at UC Davis in agricultural and environmental chemistry, studying agricultural waste treatment to reduce environmental impacts on dairies. I was a year 12 fellow, so 2021, and I was placed in the Senate Environmental Quality Committee. And I applied for the fellowship because as I was going through my graduate school PhD, I was thinking about what I liked and didn't like about research and about, science. And I realized I didn't really click as much with like the bench work and like focusing really specifically on one topic. What I really did like was communicating science and thinking about the big picture and thinking about how this applies to people's real lives. And being close to the Capitol, I was exposed to policy pretty early on and realized that this is really clicking with what my values are, what I see myself doing in the future. And I was really lucky to get to meet, various fellows and connect with CCST, just, being in close proximity to the Capitol. So I would say that the fellowship did meet my expectations just because I had some idea of what to expect going in just from that proximity. But it exceeded my expectations in a lot of ways too, of what I learned, what I got to experience, how much I got to challenge myself. So I really enjoyed my fellowship here.
Thank you, Rylie. Tsou, do you want to go next?
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tsou. I did my PhD at the joint bioengineering program at UC Berkeley and UCSF, doing stem cell research. My fellowship year was a decade ago in 2013. And I was placed in the office of former Assembly Member Rob Bonta, now the Attorney General. Now I am the principal analyst at the California Health Benefits Review Program, which completely lines up with what I did in my fellowship program, which means that you can do the fellowship program and continue. But I applied really similarly to Rylie. I really enjoyed communicating about science. I took this class where I had to basically work with engineers and business people. And I found that I loved being the go-between between those two groups that had no idea how to communicate with each other. And I loved being able to connect them and then actually get us to be able to do projects that helped, get us to where we needed to be in terms of grades, but it was just really fun to do. The fellowship definitely went beyond my expectations. I knew nothing about politics, nothing about policy when I got into this, and I was able to work on things that I had never worked on before. I worked with communities that I had never been engaged with. And it was really cool to be able to use the critical thinking skills that I had learned in grad school and actually apply them to something that directly impacted people, which was another hope for me when I joined the program.
Thank you. Michael, can I hand it over to you?
Sure. Hey, everybody, my name's Michael. I'm a year 13 fellow, so I just finished the fellowship. I was a 2021 fellow. Let's see, I did my graduate school in chemical engineering and material science at the University of Minnesota. There I was studying, I was a polymer scientist, understanding how we use polymers to template microchips. I applied to this fellowship I was doing research, like kind of on one side of things and doing this polymer science research. On another side, I was kind of engaged with nonprofit work and working with people who were kind of on the ground and really engaged with their communities and really inspired by work like that. And I was trying to figure out a way to bridge those two worlds, and I didn't necessarily understand how. And I've heard about science policy, but I didn't really understand what does that mean. So that kind of lends itself to the next question, which is like, what surprised me? Meaning, I applied to this fellowship kind of being like, what is a science policy? What is policy in this realm? So I think that really surprised me to understand like what all these doors are and all these mechanisms for applying my graduate studies and science into the policy world in ways that it seems like there's almost no connection. There are ways to kind of connect back to what I was doing. And I think that was like kind of a big surprise and realization through the year of how much of the skills that, I'm bringing from one world into this other world of science policy. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. Renita, please introduce yourself.
Hey, hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Renita Polk. I was a fellow, year 7 fellow, so I was a fellow in 2016. I received my PhD from Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine in genetics and molecular biology. For my fellowship, I was placed in the office of Assemblymember Mike Gibson. So why did I apply to the fellowship? I think it's similar to some of the things that Rylie mentioned, but throughout my grad school time in grad school, I really wanted to work on something that had a direct impact on people's lives. And I sometimes struggled to see how the work that I was doing would be impactful for helping people, improving lives. And so I applied for the fellowship because I kind of working on policy, I kind of saw a pathway of how the things that I worked on or could work on would be directly impactful and have an impact on, everyday folks living their lives and help make their lives better. And did the fellowship meet my expectations? I will say in some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. Yes, in the fact that I wanted to learn about policy and the policy process. I didn't have any experience with policymaking before doing the fellowship. So it was great to kind of learn about how policy is actually made, how that process works. And in some ways, it did not meet my expectations, which is actually a good thing in this case. I don't know if any of you all have heard or watched the television show House of Cards, but that was when I was applying for the fellowship. That was a pretty popular show, and it's about a very manipulative, conniving politician. And I was terrified that everyone would be like that when I came into the legislature. And I'm pleased to report that is not the case. Everyone that I interacted with and worked with was very kind, welcoming, helpful, collaborative. So that is one way that it did not meet my expectations, but I'm glad that it did not meet those expectations.
I love that. Thank you, Renita. That was excellent. Of course, the fellowship has had to transition over the last couple of years through COVID. We've had remote placements, we've had hybrid, we've had in-person. And so this current year, and then looking towards next year, where many of you in the audience might be applying, we expect in-person or hybrid placements. And it kind of changes, right? As each placement office is navigating what will be best for them. But the training aspects of our fellowship are in person. So we still ask that you move to Sacramento. And so I want to start, keeping that in mind, that we have these expectations and we have to be adaptable and flexible because the policy world is just constantly changing, and perhaps even more so through a pandemic. I wanted to ask, what is something that surprised you most about your day-to-day work or life as a fellow? And I'll start, I think, with Anchi and then Michael, so we can get a little legislature and executive branch perspective.
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. What surprised me about the day-to-day was just how fast it was. Like in the boot camp, we were prepped saying, oh, you're going to have to do things really quickly. No, it's really fast. Like I think within my first couple of weeks, had to prepare a presser and talking points for a press conference an hour before the press conference happened. And I didn't know the subject. So it was a little bit intense in that direction. So, but I mean, not every day is like that, but sometimes the day-to-day is just a little bit faster than I expected. I'll keep it short.
Thank you. Michael?
Sure. So I skipped this in my intro, but I was placed in the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, or GOBIZ for short. And I'm still currently at that office as a Sustainable Innovation Specialist. So I think in that placement, kind of what surprised me is the number of people I actually got to work with and the number of partners that we had inside of the agency. I think I was kind of expecting it to be very internal at first. And it just found every day, whether we were talking to somebody at water boards or CNRA, the Natural Resources Agency, or now we're talking to a company, now we're talking to a city and county government. I think I was just really surprised of just the scope of work there and the breadth that we reached and just how different everybody's interpretation of what we do is, whether it's inside of government or outside of government, and kind of disseminating that down was yeah, definitely like a fun surprise and definitely a learned skill through the year.
Thank you. I think that ties nicely into my second question, and I'll toss this over to Rylie and Renita. What are some transferable skills from graduate school that you found most useful as a fellow? Rylie?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, number one, just being a critical thinker and being able to take in a lot of information, analyze it, and synthesize it very quickly. Like Anshi said, things move very fast. You have to take in a lot of information quickly and be able to communicate it in a way that policymakers can understand. So I think, in grad school, you're looking at one subject very deeply for a long time, but you learn those analytical skills that, especially like, I was working on mostly environmental subject matter. I already was somewhat familiar with that area. I could learn that information really quickly, figure out like what the important parts are. So if you ever go through, like journal articles, academic journal articles, and you know how to skim those, you know how to pick out the important parts. Like that's the kind of thing that you'll often do. Like for me, when I was in a committee office, doing that for my bill analyses. So it translated very well into my office.
Wonderful. Renita?
Yeah, I think my answer is kind of along the lines of what Rylie mentioned, but definitely the critical thinking piece for the issue areas that I covered when I was in Assemblymember Gibson's office were not necessarily related to any of the things that I worked on in grad school, not necessarily science related, but those critical thinking skills that I learned during grad school were still important, especially so a lot of times we would have to read through analyses and then read through the different support and opposition letters on specific bills, and then kind of advise the assembly member on what we thought. And a lot of times with those support and opposition letters, things are worded in certain ways to, get folks to agree with whoever is writing the letter. And so you have to critically think about that and understand, okay, this is what they're saying, but is that actually, what is happening? And being able to kind of think through those arguments that people are putting forward to advise the assembly member on how to vote on bills. So that I think is definitely a skill that will be used. And even if you are working on things that are not directly related to what you studied during your PhD studies, those critical thinking skills will definitely come in handy.
Thank you. My next question, I'm going to start with Michael, and then I'll invite any of our other panelists to add in if you have a good example. Could you, Michael, share some work product examples? So how were you involved in the policy process? What kind of deliverables did you have?
Sure. So I think executive sometimes feels less linked to the policymaking process, right? Because we're not moving through bills. I mean, to call back to the last question, that was another thing that was a big surprise, which is actually how involved we can be in the strategy. Whereas perhaps the policy says, draw an elephant on this piece of paper and it's this inside this box. And, our role on the executive side is we get to fill in some of those details and really understand that. And I think that's where I was able to impact the policy or the practice of some of these programs that came through. So I was working, one of the products that I was helping to deliver was a data tool. So I was leveraging some of those critical thinking skills, how to work with data, how to think about big data, and apply it to this map that we were creating of California, basically to serve as a resource for communities to use to understand their regional economies. And I think we ended up using that map to basically say, inside of this program, as you're working on these large planning tables and you're thinking about how to spend state dollars to build up your regional economies, we were able to actually use that data tool and that map and give it to communities to help them understand basically what their opportunities are. So I think that was a way I was able to kind of plug in my data and science background into this tool and this resource that communities end up using to inform this new program we were creating in California.
Thank you. Any other panelists want to talk about a deliverable or a work product that you worked on as a fellow?
Yeah, I can jump in there. So with committees, your work product is pretty straightforward. It's usually bill analyses. So you have a bill, you're explaining what this bill does, what the background is, what you need to know. But one thing that's interesting is you also get to kind of help shape the policy behind that bill. So committees can actually recommend amendments. So if you think there's something that should be changed or that doesn't make sense, you can recommend actual changes to the bill. And then you'll also work with the chair on voting recommendations. So as a committee consultant, you actually have a lot of leeway in shaping policy as well.
Thanks, Rylie. Our next question was submitted in advance from one of our audience members, so thank you for that. And they note that there seems to be a gap between what scientists and people in the research communities know and do compared to what policymakers know. So as a CCST fellow, what methods do you use to try to disseminate and communicate really technical information so that policymakers can make informed decisions? Renita, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Sure. And I will say, actually, I don't think I mentioned this in my introduction, but after I finished my fellowship, I stayed on and worked in the legislature for the Senate Budget Committee as a committee consultant for a couple of years before moving to my current position at the California Department of Aging. And so my fellowship year and years that I worked in the Senate Budget Committee, one of the things that I learned is that, policymakers, they don't have a lot of time. And so whenever I was relaying information to the senator, assembly member, I would boil it down to the most important thing. So as I was preparing to brief them, I would think about, okay, what are the absolute things that they need to know? And I'd pick out, maybe 2 or 3 really kind of key points and relay that to them. And all of these policymakers, they're smart people. They if they want to know more information, if they have a question, they will ask. And then at that point, you can kind of expand a little bit. But so I think what's really important for kind of communicating information is just boiling it down to the key points, and just being kind of as efficient as possible, and because they don't have a lot of time. I remember when I was during my fellowship year, I was supposed to be briefing the assembly member on an issue before a hearing, and we just didn't have a lot of time. So I ended up briefing him in the elevator as we were walking to the hearing. So I had, 2-3 minutes as we're walking to brief him on this bill that he was going to have to vote on during a hearing that we were going to. So
maybe that experience was a little bit similar to House of Cards, the briefing while running around between places. Chi, do you have anything you wanted to add from a personal office or committee perspective?
Sure. Yeah, actually, I guess I should have thrown on all the things that I've done in between. So I worked in the personal office. I worked as a health committee consultant. I also was in a state agency for a little bit. And now that I was a lobbyist, now I do third-party work. So I've kind of done a lot of different things that you could potentially do from the fellowship. So if you have questions on that, I got you. But for disseminating new information, I thought the other thing that I think was really important, at least for my boss, was making sure that I had a list of organizations that he had heard of that also had that same kind of perspective. And so I would boil it down, like Renita was saying, to the most important points. And I was like, oh yeah, and this is backed up by A, B, and C, who are organizations that he trusts or has heard about or the media has heard about. And so that he knows that it's not just, his staffer, the nerd from Cal and wherever saying these things. It's like other people are doing this too, and other scientific organizations know that too. So just something I would add.
Perfect, thank you. We have a question from the audience, and I'm going to pass this one to Michael first because you most recently went through our placement process, and then want to open it up to the panelists after that. Did you get an opportunity to choose or indicate preference for placement? And if so, what factors did you take into account when looking at the different placement opportunities?
Yeah, we did. We got to send over our list of preferences of all the offices we interviewed with. And I think we had anywhere from like 10 to 15 interviews, but we got a chance to meet all of the offices, at least briefly. And though it was kind of like almost like a matching process on CCST's part. And they do a great job of understanding, I think, who we are and who our office placements are, and kind of like, telling us to put their trust. And I think it always basically works out, or at least did in most of my, at least in all of my case and all of our year's case. So the second part of the question, which is, what did inform my decision? So I think going back, I mentioned I really wanted to work kind of on the ground with people inside of communities. And my placement at GoBiz allowed me to do that. They had a new team coming on, a community and place-based solutions team. So that was definitely part of my decision. I think another big part, similar to grad school when we were choosing advisors, is how will I mesh with this office and how will I mesh with this mentor? And I think that was really important for me. So, understanding how my mentor operates and what I want to learn through the year and what this mentor can potentially provide, to me, and how they'll mentor me in their mentorship style. So I think those two things, a little bit of content and a little bit of like, is this a good fit personally for me, factored into that decision.
Thanks, Michael. I know the placement process can be one of the most stressful parts of the fellowship. There's a lot of uncertainty, so I'm glad that this question came up. Rylie, Renita, Anchi, any of you want to add something?
Yeah, I can add. So very similar to Michael, I think it's kind of funny when you're going through the placement process because everybody has a very different way of doing their rankings or how they assess, what factors to consider. Some people, it's more like, I don't know, I vibe with this office more. And then like me, I had like a 5-factor ranking system with numbers and everything. And I think like the things I cared about were, is the subject matter compatible with what I'm interested in? Does a mentorship style fit? Could I just see myself in this office environment? Is the day-to-day work something I want to do? And like, does this kind of help me on my career path? So there's a lot of different factors you can take, but it's really going to be personalized to the things that you want to prioritize for your fellowship year. And also you can also indicate if you don't want to be in a certain office, you can also indicate that as well. And they'll take that into consideration when they're placing.
Yeah, and I have one other thing that just kind of came to mind, but I think kind of indicating, your top choices for placement reminds me a lot of thinking about, what picking your PhD advisor and what lab you're going to work in. Because, I often hear people say, don't just pick a lab because of the work that they do. You have to make sure that you'll actually enjoy working with those people and working in that environment. So I think that's also something to think about when you're going through the placement process and indicating kind of your top choices. Sorry. I'm sorry, I have a smart speaker and it just went off and I was telling it to stop. And it's still going. I'm so sorry.
We can barely even hear it. It's not a big deal.
I'm so sorry. It was reminding me of my next appointment. Sorry. Yeah, so just when thinking about your placement choices, don't just think about the what that particular agency or office works on, but also think about the folks that you'll be working with and whether you'll actually enjoy working with those folks and if it'll be a good kind of work environment, because you'll likely be spending quite a bit of time with those folks. So
actually, Sarah, I have one more thing. With an example, I also think kind of like underneath all of what everyone's saying is that the values that you have, I think, need to match well with the person or office or wherever you are. Because I think that my placement was awesome, but there was one experience where I thought that I knew exactly how to present the bill recommendation to my boss. It was a really, really, really controversial bill. And I had given him all of the stats and all of the people who were for and against it, and had laid out the talking points and the arguments against the opposition and all that other stuff. And it turned out that there was some political reason for him to make a different decision. And it completely floored me. And I don't think that this isn't to say that we didn't have the same values. I think we do have similar values, but just beware that you might be in a situation where your boss is going to make a different decision than what you would do personally. And so one, it's important that you don't have that situation as often as possible by choosing an office or a placement that is in line with your values. And then if you do get in a situation where they make a decision, they're the elected official, they're the appointed position. And so you have to know that your job is to give them the information that they need to do to make the decision that they were elected to do, and then let it go. But it can be hard. And that was a big learning moment for me in my fellowship.
That's such an important point, Anchi. I'm really glad you said that. I think a lot of our fellows have experienced a similar situation. Our next question is, do fellows work on both physical and social science topics? I'm really happy this question came up because we love to see social scientists apply for the fellowship. So I'd love to hear from our crew here. I think of all physical scientists, if you might be able to share examples of where a social science perspective was really important in the work that you did as a fellow or since then, honestly. Anyone want to jump in?
I could start. So like I mentioned, I was on the community and place-based solutions team, which meant the program we were working on was a lot about regional planning tables and people coming together to make large collaboratives, which begs into, which leans into what is effective community engagement? What does it mean to engage a community, and what is the impact and result of that? And, we're bringing an evaluator onto the program now to kind of understand that. How collaborative are these collaboratives essentially? So I think that's really lends itself to social science really well, and understanding how people come together to plan and organize, and the impacts of certain voices there and certain voices not there. And I think all of that, really would lend itself well to somebody who has a social science background.
Yeah, I think, no matter what, if you come from a social science or a physical science background, you're still coming with those transferable skills that we talked about. And oftentimes the placement office doesn't necessarily match your background. And there are a lot of, placements that are kind of more geared towards a more social science. Like my year, there was the judiciary committee as a placement, or the education committee, or the housing committee, things that aren't necessarily aligned with physical science. So there's a lot of opportunities to, if you're interested in continuing kind of in that vein, to pursue that through these placements as well.
Thank you. And thank you to our audience for the questions. Please keep them coming. Next up is, how accessible is the fellowship to people with disabilities? In particular, what are the physical demands of the position? And I think, Michael, if it's okay, we'll go back to you, just because I think the most recent classes with the hybrid work and all the kind of different options might be an important perspective.
Yeah, I think the CCST and both the mentors they provide are great in this case. I think they're really willing to make sure that you have an environment that's going to work for you. And I think that has to do with the size of the cohort and like the investment that CCST has, I think, in all of us as fellows through the year. they're kind of very present, as you want to utilize them as a resource, and that's greatly appreciated. And I've come to them, when I needed help along with some things. So yeah, I think, this is very individualized, obviously, but you have a great team of mentorship through the program, both at CCST and both in your placement office. And your placement office kind of knows that we all come from different backgrounds and we all have different needs. We had a mixture of, I was all remote for the year. We had some people that were hybrid. We had some people that were mostly in office, because that was just the result of the placements. And I think, considering that as part of your considerations when you go in, understanding what is going to work best for you and what your preferences are is really important. And you have a really understanding team at CCST to help along with, what you need.
And I'll add in just one kind of logistical answer. As a fellow, you get a small stipend for professional development, and you can also use half of that stipend to set up a home office if your placement is hybrid or remote. So that includes any type of setup that you would need in order to be successful in your placement: desk, chair, et cetera, standing desk, sitting desk, whatever the case might be. Our next question ties in really nicely to my logistics answer. Can you give some examples of the professional development workshops that are held throughout the year? So every Friday, CCST hosts the fellows in the afternoon for all kinds of professional development learning opportunities. So Rylie, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I'm trying to bring it all back right now. So there was a lot of different things that kind of cycled throughout the year. A lot of them were people who work in government in various offices or different ways. So I think, we had like the director of the Office of Veterans Affairs one time, or somebody from the Natural Resources Agency, or I think we had like a legislator come one time. And then also like more on like the professional development side. We talked about applications. So once we were kind of getting to the point where we're all going to be applying to our next thing, kind of that kind of professional development, networking, those soft skills, I guess. We also did some DEI stuff, so diversity, equity, and inclusion. Talking about that and how we can incorporate that into our work. So it really expands a pretty wide variety. But and ours were all virtual. I don't know if that will change either.
It has changed. Thankfully, that we're at least hybrid now and increasing the number that are in person, which has been really nice. This last November training boot camp was mostly in person again, and that was the first time since the pandemic. So that was really, really fun. Our next question is, how often do you see your fellows once you're placed and after, you're not in the CCST offices every day? Renita and Anchi, I'd like to ask both of you so we can get kind of the sense for two different cohorts.
So, and of course, my fellowship was before the pandemic, so some things, might be a little different now. Rylie and Sarah both mentioned those kind of professional development seminars. So every Friday, all of the fellows will come together for those seminars where sometimes you're meeting with folks that work in the exec branch. Sometimes it'll just be to kind of chat about how the fellowship is going. So that at the very least, those meetings happen every Friday. And then I know in my fellowship year in particular, all of the fellows in my class, we were pretty close. So we would try and as many of us as were able to, we would try and meet and have lunch together maybe once a week or something like that. So, I mean, I guess it all depends on how much you want to meet in person. If you really want to kind of connect with your cohort, but at the very least, those are those Friday seminars. And a lot, I know, not just my year, but just seeing other years, a lot of the fellows kind of get together to do fun stuff like go on hikes on the weekends and things like that. Just and those first 2 weeks of the fellowship, or not 2 weeks, sorry, the first gosh, it's been so long, I can't even remember what the time frame is, but that boot camp that that you have at the beginning of the fellowship, you'll be with your cohort of fellows kind of all day, every day for that point in time. And so I think a lot of good friendships are forged during that boot camp, which then I think extends into the fellowship.
My class year 4 was a little bit less social, I would say, than some of the other classes. But there were happy hours after the boot camps, and people would come. And I would actually say that you don't necessarily have to stick with your year's fellowship. I ended up connecting with a lot of the year 3 fellows and hanging out with them, which was really cool. And we ended up, 2 of us ended up on the health committee for a couple of years, and it was really fun. And then there were a couple of people from my class that I ended up connecting with and staying in touch with, but our class overall kind of branched out after the fellowship. But again, it was great having the year 3s to be able to kind of rely on, fall back on, and be like, okay, you feel me, you understand what it's like being a science fellow. And just continuing those kind of friendships from there.
Thank you. And I think that's even more the case now as our alumni network has grown, right? And we're a little more organized. There's a monthly alumni happy hour. And so we really work to connect you with a lot of the alumni, those in Sacramento and those in Bay Area, DC, et cetera. So there's a lot of opportunities to connect. Michael, I want to send the next question to you with hybrid, remote, different work options, your fellowship year. What was it like moving to and living in Sacramento?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think back, like what piece of this. I think I'll start, which ties really nicely to the last question. It's really great that you get to move to a new city with 15 other people that are in a similar boat as you. That made the move so much easier, and it's so nice to come in with a network of people who all want to explore a place as well. So I think that really helped the move. I think Sacramento is really great because it's a really accessible city. There's enough going on, it's easy to access. It's not extremely overwhelming because of its size, but there's still a good amount happening around. So I think that's been really fun through the year to kind of plug into different things outside of the fellowship and to have access to that and all those hobbies and, a network of people that want to do those things with you. I was all remote, so that was definitely an adjustment for me going from lab work to remote work. I think once again, you have your CCST, the CCST, you have your placement office, both super supportive in that transition and working through it. And then of course, it's just kind of like that self journey as well of saying this is too much time in my apartment and I'm going to go join pottery outside, or I'm going to go to the gym, go for a run, or hang out with some other fellows. So really just utilizing the resources around you. Yeah.
Thank you. Rylie, do you want to add anything, since your fellowship was the year before that, so it's maybe even more remote?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was already in Davis, so I didn't have to move too far, and I was already, familiar with the area. But like Michael said, starting a new job or, moving somewhere new with a built-in cohort was so nice. You have people you can be like, I don't know what the nearest grocery store is, or, where to go for this resource. And so you already have a built-in network there. And also the CCST alumni do a really good job of providing resources to be like, oh, here's my favorite restaurant, or here's this place you should check out. So having that alumni network of people who have kind of been through this process was super, super helpful for starting a new job, moving to a new place, kind of helping you get oriented. And then also that first month boot camp was also a big part of that as well.
Thank you. Anchi, I want to move back to you. Could you talk a little bit about how the fellowship opened doors for you career-wise?
Yeah, absolutely. So in a personal office, you meet a ton of people. I think in most of these positions, but you meet a ton of people in a personal office because any constituent, it can come to your office and ask questions, and so you meet a ton of people. I was a health committee staffer, and so I met a lot of organizations through that, and that's kind of how I built my reputation as someone who knew about health insurance, who knew about health, and can talk about some of the complexities in a way that people could understand. And so if if you're a PhD, where you are a reliable person, right? You've earned that credit. And then being able to just kind of show that to other people builds your reputation. You build your reputation with not only the other organizations, but also with other staffers, with your boss, and CCST loves you already at that point. But it just knowing that those people and that network, people will often get job offers that way. That's how I ended up getting a couple of offers. I ended up staying with my office for a year or two after that. But there were definitely opportunities to work for lobbyist organizations, nonprofit organizations, that come just kind of by showing that you're a good worker, basically. And making sure that you have good connections with organizations that you work with. So if you end up being the staffer for social services, or if you are the committee consultant on housing, knowing your issues really well will basically speak for itself and open doors for you.
Thank you. Renita, can I ask a similar kind of question? How does CCST, and maybe even think about the alumni network too, help you land a job after the fellowship?
Sure. So a couple different things come to mind, but I remember even towards the end of my fellowship, when I was applying for jobs and things like that, like there were CCST staff and some of the mentors within CCST, like they volunteered to do practice interviews with me, things like that. And those were all really helpful. And in kind of similar to what Anchi was saying, just by participating in the fellowship, you meet a lot of people. There's a lot of networking, and through the meeting all of those different people, you can make connections, and then even not maybe necessarily once you finish the fellowship, but later on down the line, that can lead to job offers. My boss that I currently work for, I actually originally met her during the first year of my fellowship. She was there was a bill that I was working on, and her organization was in support of the bill. So and we're both working for different organizations, different agencies than we were at that time, but that's how we originally met. So that's just kind of one of the ways that participating in the fellowship can, at least for me, helped with kind of career advancement. And then CCST, and I know CCST also helps out with towards the end of the fellowship, there is a retreat where all the fellows kind of get together, and that's kind of the main focus of the retreat, is working on your resume and thinking about job applications and how to write a job application and different things like that. So that's just kind of a few of the ways that CCST helped me personally with my job search and kind of the next step in my career. I'm sure there are things that I am forgetting, but that's where I'll stop.
That was excellent. Thank you, Renita.
Sarah,
so we're down to
jump in.
Oh yeah, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in because I think I had a bit of a different experience. I forgot to mention that I now work in a Washington state agency. So I made a big transition from working in California to looking for a job outside of state, where the fellow, people don't know what a fellow is. We don't have that kind of reputation, those connections to go off of. And I think what was really helpful is there were a few fellows in Washington that I could talk to about their experience looking for jobs that were really helpful, but also just starting in California. California really is on the cutting edge of a lot of different policies. And, Washington at the time was enacting policies that California had been doing for years. So coming in with that California experience was really helpful. And also in my fellowship year, I really got to challenge myself on some really big, really controversial climate bills. And that was something I could point to and be like, look, I've done this work. I've worked on these issues, and it transferred really well to the work I do now in Washington.
Thank you. I'm so glad you added that in. That's a really important perspective. I'm going to go to our last question, and I'd like to have each of you answer it. Heads up, Michael, I'm going to ask you first. What was the most rewarding aspect or the most rewarding single experience during your fellowship year? We'll go to Michael, and then Anshi, you're on deck.
Good thing I had my cup of coffee. I'm now ready to go with the first on deck. I definitely think, this is an easy answer for me. It's the mentorship. I haven't received mentorship like I received this year before, and it's kind of incredible. I mean, you go into CCST with a team that believes in you and is ready to see you succeed and use their resource and everything they have to help you. And then you go into a placement office and it's the same exact thing. I mean, they trust CCST and there's a good relationship and they trust the fellows that come through. So I just walked in not needing to prove myself, but rather just already having a team that was ready to propel me forward into exactly where I want to be. And that's just super rewarding and so unique just to have a year to explore with a team of people that believe in you and want to see you just kind of thrive and excel. So definitely one of the, greatest experiences. And I'm so fortunate for the year and for all that mentorship that I received.
Thank you. That was a wonderful answer. Anchi, we'll go to you next, and then Renita, you'll be on deck.
So for me, one of the most memorable moments, and it was super rewarding. I would say the mentorship is awesome as well, but slightly different pitch. I worked on a bill that mandated that Filipino education was included on the farm workers, was included in the education of K through 12 students, and it was a small bill that didn't seem to, in the big scheme of things, have a big impact on stuff, but we got thousands of letters from the Filipino American community and then supporting communities after that. But I will never forget, after the bill passed and got signed by the governor, there was a group of Filipina women who came into the office and personally thanked us and asked who the staffer was. And they personally thanked me for all of the work that I did. And it was my heart burst. It was what I did mattered to them. Sorry, I'm pregnant, so also emotional. But it was what I did made a difference in someone's life. And that's why I started the fellowship. I wanted to make an impact on my community. And that was my community. Californians are my community, and I was able to make a difference in that person's life, and that was really cool. All right, I'm gonna stop being hormonal.
Thank you. That I am talk about heartwarming. That was awesome. Thank you for the work that you did on that bill. Renita, let's go over to you.
Yeah. So I think my answer will probably be a little similar to Anshi's, but and I think, when in my intro, I mentioned why I wanted to do the fellowship was to do something that I felt had an impact and was, improving people's lives and making things better for them. So a bill in particular that I worked on when I was a fellow, I still remember the bill number. It was AB 1067, but that established a Bill of Rights for foster youth. And that, I think that was probably the most rewarding thing that I worked on during my fellowship. And throughout, as the bill was moving through the process, and after the bill was signed, we received a lot of phone calls, and we had some folks come into the office, foster youth and former foster youth, describing how important that was, and former foster youth saying, if this had been around when I was in foster care and when I was younger, this would have changed things completely. So that was just super. That was just awesome. That was kind of what the most rewarding thing that I worked on during my fellowship. So that was the highlight. Yeah.
That is wonderful, Renita. Thank you for sharing. And Rylie.
Okay, well, I had an incredibly supportive office my fellowship year, and they really kind of let me pick what I wanted to do, which was super nice. So they started me off with some easy bills, but once I proved what I could do, I basically was like, hey, I want to work on this really, really controversial, really complex, high profile climate bill. I think it was AB 1395. It would have reset California's climate goals and greenhouse gas emission targets for the whole state. And they were like, okay, we're going to give this to you. And it was intimidating, but I felt supported the whole way. When things got a little bit too crazy, or I felt like I was in over my head, we're going to support you here, we'll come in and help you, but you're still steering the ship. And so that was a really rewarding experience. I felt like I did everything that a committee consultant would do in that 1 year, and learned so much, and that has really helped me in my career and showing what I can do.
Thank you, Rylie. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. We're at the end of our time. If you'd like to watch this webinar again, or you have a colleague who's interested but couldn't make it, it will be posted on our website. And I hope you're able to join us for the third webinar this year on January 12th at 11 a.m., where we'll discuss navigating the CCST Fellowship application and interview process. Thank you to all of my panelists. Your time and your expertise and your sharing of your experience was just so helpful, I hope, to our audience, and it just was really wonderful to hear everything you had to say. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.